Well, welcome everybody. Holy Spirit engagement number 23. And we are so excited that you are here with us. We are just believing that tonight all of us are going to receive something from Holy Spirit and that He will do something for each one of us. Listen, I'm going to say this now, but we'll talk about it later. Man, God was awesome last night in protecting our people because that storm came all around all of us. We have stories of some stuff that has already happened, some praise reports that came in. But our God is a big God, and there were some people that did get damaged, and we're praying for all of those people and that went through any destruction, and someone that actually got killed here in Cartersville. But we're just, so thankful that the Lord protected us. And so tonight we're going to do something a little bit different than we have been doing. And we want to give you a notice on this up front is we're going to start our music. And we're going to give you the opportunity to text in questions that you would just like to have answered. Now you got to understand it's only Holly and I here. So it should be questions that the two of us could answer. But if you have any questions you would like to ask, and it could be about anything, we'll be glad to try to answer those. You'll text them in. We'll try to follow them and make sure that we get questions and we try to answer as many as we can. But just with everything that's been going on, if anybody's got anything they'd just like to know or ask about, we would like to do that. So if you will, start thinking about those questions, text them in. We'll try to keep up with them. And after this first song is over, then we'll come back and we'll look at some of your text. We'll answer some questions. If that goes good and you guys like it, we'll continue it. If you don't like it, text us and say, hey, I don't like this part. I'd rather have the music. You just let us know that because we want to do what is beneficial for you. We just felt like today as we were praying, the Holy Spirit said, open this up for a time for them to ask questions. So we're going to be obedient and do that. And let's just see where it goes. We love to be led by the Holy Spirit. That's what this whole ministry is about, is just being led by the Spirit. So this is an opportunity for us to do that and just follow His direction. But welcome to all of you that's here. You've been so faithful every night. So let's just get going and let's see what Holy Spirit wants to do.
As we walk in your ways, God, we receive your friendship with humility, gratitude. We cannot stand without you.
Well, hallelujah. In Christ alone, you know, if we want to know what it is that we're supposed to do, all we have to do is ask. And He is so faithful. And so we just want to just give Him thanks and glory today for that. And so look, some of you sent in some questions already, and we're going to try to answer as many of them as we can. And for you guys that jumped on late, we're going to do some question and answer periods tonight. If you got any questions you'd like to ask, please text those in so we can try to keep up with them. If we have more questions than we can answer tonight, then we'll think about how we'll do that maybe in some few days this week. So one of the first questions we got to ask is, when are we all going to get back together again? Here's what we have talked about and discussed as a ministry now. We still have a weekend schedule for May 15th, 16th, and 17th. We have not made a decision about that weekend yet, and we will wait for our government officials to give us some direction on what it is that they think that we should do. If they release churches to go back to start having services again, that's the big key that all of you should be looking for and watching for. We think they're going to make a decision by May the 1st. That was what I had told you guys in my Friday feature last week. I think the Holy Spirit had showed that to us. So we'll wait and see. But as of right now, we still have that weekend planned. We contacted all the guests, and we gave the guests an option of either they could stay on that weekend and wait on what happened, or they could move to another weekend. It was overwhelming that people said, we want to wait and see what's going to happen. And so we owe it to them, and that is what we're going to do. So that would probably be our first opportunity to get back together if we're able to do that. Someone else asked, are there going to be any changes in the ministry? And the answer to that is yes, because I think it's going to be very difficult for us to ever go back to what was normal. And so we will do things that will be safe for more people. How we do communion, I think we're going to change how we do that in some circumstances and situations. The cleanliness, trying to make everybody aware of how we're distancing each other, how close we're confining to get together. There's some things that we are doing that is going to help us in that scenario that I can't really talk about right now, but we are looking at different things to be able to implement that's going to make it a little bit better for all of us from a safety standpoint. Those would be the biggest changes. Another question that came in is, are we going to continue to do this? Boy, that's a really good question. The Holy Spirit instructed Holly and I to do this until He told us to stop. So we're just really waiting for Him. And I believe He'll give us direction and guidance on that. And until that happens, we'll continue to do this. I think this has taught us that there's a lot of things that we could do even during the week. If we didn't do this every single day, there's certain days we could do it. Maybe we do it bi-weekly. Who knows? We just don't know yet because the Holy Spirit hadn't revealed that. But I think it's another instrument for us now to use to be able to teach and also to reach out to the community, because this has bonded our community. All of you guys that have been on here faithfully now for 23 days, there's a bond that's taking place here, that the connection in the spirit that we have that is really good. And so we want to try to continue that so that we can move forward with it. I think someone asked a question. Holly's going to come and answer a question really quick. And the question was, are we going to post HSE weekends for the remainder of this year? And are those weekends going to change? And so I'm going to let her come and answer that right now.
Hi, you guys. And yeah, Nancy, that question, we've been looking at it. And our first commitment to the Lord is, and the body of Christ, is to ensure that we have women's weekends and men's weekends. And I guess I'm just going to kind of use that term like flagship. I mean, we know that that is what we are called to do first. And then as the ministry has grown, then we've added, and then ministering to the teens. And then we've added, the couples weekends and the WASP weekends and things like that. So what we're looking at is once everything gets opened back up, the first priority would be to look at what was canceled and minister, to those individuals first. And then we can then take the schedule and then fill in, say, additional weeks to maybe get, say, a WASP in and a couples in. But our first commitment is to hold as close to ministering to women every 6 weeks, even with this lull, which we really haven't had the lull because we didn't have any weekends scheduled anyway in April for women. But really just keep that on schedule and then doing the men's weekends, hopefully following every, say, 2 women's weekends. And then as interest levels are there for, of course, our couples, our WASP conferences, then we'll host those as needed. And then the other one was, it just went through, but we are committed for our enhancements. For our women's and men's. And I mean, you know what? God's outside of time. God's got this. He's got the schedule, and he's going to make a way because this is his heart, is to minister to the hurting, the lost, and it's real hard. He seeks, obedience. The freedom is ours, but it's a whole heck of a lot easier to walk that life of obedience when you've been totally set free. So I think we're gonna finish up 2020 in good shape. I just don't think the Lord, gave us something and then we're just gonna be way off the mark because that's not who God is. So that was one of the questions.
All right, we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to go back to the music. And if any of you have questions, please send them in as we're worshiping. But one of the questions was, has the Holy Spirit shown y'all what it's going to be like doing ministry when this is over? Only thing I can tell you is, Holly and I have a heart to minister more today than we have ever had. I think we're going to enter into a season here that the body of Christ has a great opportunity to reach people, to share with them what it is to live your life with power and to live it with the Holy Spirit. We have committed to that, as I had said last Friday. Tom Linder has committed to that. We are looking already at 2021. What does it mean for 2021? And we think the Holy Spirit will really reveal that to us. But it's going to take a lot of people, and it's going to take a lot of you guys helping us. But ministry is going to take a greater focus in our lives. Not that it hasn't already, because we're committed full-time anyway. But we have a zeal. We have an excitement right now that we have opportunities like we've never had before. That the devil tried to stop everything. Well, God is releasing a new attitude in some people, a new desire into some people, and the Holy Spirit is alive and well and willing to touch people's lives like never before, and we just want to be part of that. So we're just thankful for all of you. We're thankful that we have the opportunity to minister, that we have this platform right now. This has been awesome. So let's go back, let's praise and worship, and if any of you have some other questions, send them in to us, and we'll try to answer them.
call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand. And I'll recall
based on size, what they were called to do for security and protection. And He is our security and protection. But let's ask ourselves, what man-made borders have we put up? That wall, what have we put up that is keeping us from total trusting, having trust in Him? Ask the Lord to reveal that to you this moment. And let's break through that border in the name of Jesus. There's a healing and there's a miracle tonight that a border is going to be broken through because it wasn't defined by the Lord.
like that. We'd like to do it. But we need to do it on a HS3 weekend first. We need to do it Listen, if God is for you, then it says everything else could come against you. All things could try to distract you, try to keep you from doing what it is you're supposed to do. But if God is with you, if you will stand with Him, if you will listen to Him, if you will allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you, it says that all things will be given unto you and will be taken care of for you. Man, hallelujah, how glorious is that? I know you guys read these messages that come in. And so we got a message from Wanda Nash. Her family was hit last night in the tornadoes. Some of the houses were okay, but some of them were not. Some of them got severely damaged. Now this is what this is all about. And so, Wanda, I'm going to speak this to you. I pray that your family, through this whole process, that there will not be any fear, that you'll not have any concerns, that you'll not have any worry, you'll not have any undue stress in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. God says that He is faithful and that He can do all things. And whatever damage has been done to your property, I believe that that damage is able to get fixed quickly. I believe that there's no hindrances from any insurance companies or for anybody that may need to try to do something to your property to get it better. I think that God just sends people along your way and into your path that will say, I have come here to help you, to lift you up, to whatever it is that you need to be done, that we would like to help you. I believe you are going to receive divine favor from God. I am asking God to just pour down His blessings onto you and your family now, that divine favor will be released into you guys all around you in everything that you do and everything that you desire. And most of all, I want you to know you have this group of people now. All of us. If you need something, Wanda, if your family needs something, you reach out to us. You let us know. If there's any way that we can do whatever it is that you need to have done, we want to try to do that to help your family. And I know this whole group of people on here with us right now would agree with me. We're here to help each other. That's what the body of Christ is all about. And so I'm just thank you, Lord, that you gave all of us an opportunity to pray with Wanda tonight and lift her up and to lift her family up. I want to tell you that during this time, Holly and I, Tom Linder, have spent a lot of time just seeking the Lord, listening to the Holy Spirit. He has revealed some stuff to us. Now is not the time that we can really talk about that. But I'm believing in a very short period of time that we will be released to make a major announcement that will affect this ministry and will have an effect on most of you. We are excited about it, but we're just waiting for the Holy Spirit to really confirm what it is that we believe that we've heard. And so that's an exciting thing that's coming down the way. One of the things that has really been birthed in us during this time is we will have an HS3. We had mentioned HS3 to you guys previously. That is the next level above an enhancement or an enrichment. We are going to do an HS3 this year. The Holy Spirit has revealed to us during this time period the content that needs to go into that. And that's what we were waiting for, is for Him just to give us the message. Well, He started to give us the message. And so now we're excited to be able to say that we are going to plan to do that sometime this year. I hope you're letting the Holy Spirit speak to you during this time period, and that you're using this time to be with family members, but most of all that you're letting God speak to you, letting Him commune with you, and just letting Him love you like He might not have ever shown you over a long period of time. And that's how incredible this has all been. You know, we've had a lot of people on here tonight that have not been on here before. And is this your first time with us? Thank you for being here. We're doing this every night until the Holy Spirit tells us to stop. And we want you to come back and join us again. At the end of this next song, we will have communion together. So I want you guys to get all your communion elements together. This has been a great time tonight. If you've enjoyed the questions or in us just talking to you a little bit, let us know that. You can continue to respond after we go off the air, but just let us know so we'll know how we want to proceed in the future. We just really want to tell you, though, how much we love you, and we've been praying for you guys. And anything that we could do from a ministry standpoint to help any of you, just let us know, because we want you to know we want to try to do that. And so I think you're going to really like this next song. And so let's just get ready. That's all I'm going to tell you. You need to get ready for this one. So let's worship. dance. Everybody rain dance.
Andre Crouch. Come on, sing it, brother. Rain. But we're looking for rain. Don't leave us dry. We need. Don't leave us dry. We need rain. Rain. Send a storm, Lord. We need. Said we need it. We need. We need a Holy Ghost storm. We need. Don't go away. We need rain. Yeah, Lord. Yeah, Lord. Rain. Don't go away. Come again some other day. We want it now. Oh, we want it now. I said,
Rain, rain, don't go away. And come again some other day. We want it now. We want it now.
rain, rain, don't go away. Come again some other day. We want it rain. We need rain. Lord, send the rain. Rain, 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 rain. Fall, fall, fall me, fall me. Rinse me, soak me, cleanse me, wash me. Rain, rain, send us home, send us home. Rain, oh Lord. I like that part that said,
Everybody rain dance.
you should miss your chance. Tonight everybody's gonna go away.
Everybody rain dance.
Come on, let's do it.
You don't wanna miss your chance. Everybody rain dance. You don't wanna miss your chance. Does Al Laird dance to this song?
Don't miss your chance. Everybody, come on and rain. Rain on me. Have mercy, rain on me. Rain on me. Rain on me. Rain. Rain. Lord, rain on me.
Everybody rain dance. Boy, I hope that you felt the Spirit moving where you're at and where you've been listening and watching tonight like it has here with us. This has been an incredible time together. It always goes so fast, and we look forward to this all throughout the day to be able to get together with you guys and how great it is. And so now Pastor Holli's going to come. We're going to have communion. After communion, I'm going to come back and just say a short prayer, and then we'll dismiss. Just remember, tomorrow we'll be back 2 o'clock, praise and worship during the middle of the day if you would like to join us during that time.
All right, so has everybody got their communion elements? Doesn't matter what it is. This afternoon when I was just asking the Lord about this time of communion, most evenings it's been, just, very, structured, and we've taken it, looking at scripture and then just saying some very specific things. But I just want this to be a time of, I want to say, intimacy with the Lord, with each one of us, one-on-one with the Lord, but then unity with the body. And I want you to lift up your bread, and we're gonna note and speak truth of what this is. But whatever it is that you are asking the Lord for, seeking the Lord for, desiring, needing, crying out for, waiting, I want you to just put that out to the Lord. So, Father, I thank you. I thank you that all at the same time, Father, you're hearing every single one of our heart's cry of what we are lifting Christ's body up for. What he did was not in vain. It was intentional. It was done. It is finished. And it is in the heavens with you right now. The truth and the life of whatever it is we're lifting up to you is in the heavens, and it's completed. So, Father, I pray in your Son's precious, precious holy name that when we take this bread and we drink of this cup, that the manifestation of that invades earth. That heaven and earth invade, and that the manifestation and the answer come forth. In Jesus' holy name, so take the bread and drink of the cup. And we thank you, Father.
Man, how awesome is that? And I believe that every prayer that you prayed before you took those elements, the word says that God heard them right then, and he sends forth the answer. And I believe that you will get your answer. I'm just going to ask you guys to agree with me personally that tomorrow I have a meeting that could be a very tough meeting. But I'm just asking you to agree with me that the presence of the Lord will be right there in the midst of that meeting, and that his will be done, and what he desires and what he wants will be what will be accomplished in that. But most of all, I want you to pray for our government officials. I want you to pray for the president. I want you to pray for the people that are surrounding him, and these doctors and people that have to make some tough decisions about what needs to be done in this country.
Down to our governors.
And it's all the way down now to the governors. And listen, there's just too much people not wanting to be on the same page, and too much criticizing going on. But I want you to pray for them and lift them up, that they will hear from God, and that God's will be done in this scenario, in this situation. You got to get man's desires, man's wishes out of it, and let's be led by the Spirit. And so Holli and I, every day, that's what we pray. We pray that the Spirit of God will move upon the government officials, and they will hear the Spirit's voice and not man's voice. And so, Father, we just lift up all of our government officials. We lift up the president and the vice president and the people that are surrounding him on this task force for this virus that has attacked this country. Father, we need to hear your voice now more than ever before. They need wisdom, knowledge to come forth. And we need to understand and know that if we will just operate in faith and believing, that it will be done, Father. And so we just give it all to you right now, and that you're speaking to them. And Father, for these governors of all of these states that now have to look out for their people, and for our governor, for Governor Kemp, just let him be led by the Spirit. Let him hear your voice to know what it needs to be done in the next few days. is we're in this 7-day period right now, Father, and then we're waiting for what it is that you show us in the next 7 days. So we just praise and thank you. We look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow night. We hope you have a great night tonight. And again, I just want to say, Father, thank you that there was no more destruction and devastation last night in these storms, because our people agreed and prayed together and you answered their prayer. So we just want to say good night, and we will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
We love you guys.